Hello, and a warm welcome to the Frontline podcast. I am R.K. Radhakrishnan. Shashi Tharoor, a three-time member of parliament and a familiar face across Indian middle-class homes, was an unlikely candidate for the post of Congress president. He contested against the unofficial official candidate Mallikarjun Kharge and lost 1072 votes to Kharge's 7897, though he did far better than the challengers in the past, including Jitendra Prasada, Sharad Pawar, and Rajesh Pilot. After the elections, Mr. Tharoor spoke to Frontline, outlining what he thinks are important issues in the party and the way forward. There has been a lot of analysis in the media and elsewhere about the 1072 votes that you polled, which is over 10% of the total votes polled. There is a view that this is because of dissent within the Congress. How do you see this?
I don't really see myself as a candidate of dissension or dissent. I pitched myself as a candidate of change, and there are a lot of people who, while loyal to the party, were convinced that the need had come for us to abandon the idea of business as usual. And that's what the thing was. I wouldn't call it particularly dissent, because even the so-called G23 letter was a letter that pointed to a number of very good proposals, most of which even Sonia Gandhi had no objection to. And I think that one could argue that these ideas, which were all reflected in my manifesto, were ideas that have largely come from experienced party workers. I have, in fact, the whole thing started when I wrote an article that came out in English, Hindi, and Malayalam. At the time that it was announced, the dates of the election were announced, I did not write about my being a candidate. I just wrote that elections would be a good thing for the party and saying why. And I was a bit astonished by the large number of people, including many people I did not personally know, who reached out to me from across the country saying, we want you to contest. And their argument was twofold. One was, you have spoken consistently for reform, and we'd like to see some of the reforms that we've shared with you taken forward. And secondly, we believe that you can attract new voters to the Congress party that the existing establishment, for whatever reason, has not been able to attract in 14 and 19. And that was seen as my strength, and that was something that I decided worth putting forward. So I came in that spirit. And it was not at all in the spirit of dissenting, it was in the spirit of strengthening the party. The feeling was, we want the party to be stronger. We wanted to bring back voters, because remember, we hit a ceiling of 19% in two successive Lok Sabha elections. We knew we couldn't go on like that. We absolutely needed to add a few percentage points. So where do we get that from? So my USP, if you want, was to try and bring in a constituency that so far in these two elections has stayed away from us. We had them once. I believe we had them in 2009 when Manmohan Singh attracted a lot of this educated, middle-class, professional background people to vote for us. But in 14 and 19, they swung to the BJP. Many of them are disillusioned with the BJP, but are not sure about us. And the feeling that many people had was, Shashi Tharoor is a guy who can bring these people back. That's essentially my calling card, as it were. So the support for me comes from people who wanted to strengthen the party, not from people who in any way consider themselves to be dissenters. Many of these are very, very loyal and hardworking people. And even amongst the nominations, though the bulk of my supporters are youngsters, there are people who, though relatively young, have spent 10, 15 years in the party. And there are a handful who spent lifetimes in the party. So Mohsina Kidwai, Saifuddin Soz, these are people who are now, Mohsina has turned 90 this year. Saifuddin Soz is in his 80s, but these are people who felt, after all their experience in the party, that I represented what the party needs. No one can accuse Mohsina Kidwai of being a dissenter. So that's the main message.
I think the problem is that there has not been an internal election since 2000. And in the history of the Congress, there have been only 6 elections. Does this add more elements to it than articulated, such as the election will throw out the Gandhis?
No, that's one of the reasons I actually went to see the Gandhis before deciding to throw my hat in the ring. was precisely because elections have been so rare that when I asked to see Sonia Gandhi to explore how she saw the election, I was half prepared for her to say, listen, why do you want to even think about contesting? We've always done things by consensus. Why don't we do it that way? It's better for the party, etc. She never said that. She said the opposite. She said, I think elections will be good for the party. I've been saying now that we should open up the party and let other voices be heard. Please contest, and I will say the same to any other colleague who feels able to contest, that they should have a chance to put forward their point of view. So I then saw Priyanka, who completely, underscored the same message, and I travelled to Palakkad, our district, and walked with Rahul Gandhi and talked to him. And he not only said that, he underscored the fact that for the last 10 years he's been calling for elections in the party. So given that the Gandhis did not see the elections as in any way directed against them, or as undermining the party, or as a vehicle of dissent, I too went forward in the spirit that this is something which the party would, at the highest levels, consider to be an appropriate way of resolving the leadership question. So then it for me became a question of very straight thing, change versus continuity. Because I'm very, very fond of Mr. Kharge. We worked very closely together in the Lok Sabha. I have a lot of respect for him. But he represents somebody who's been part of the leadership for quite a few years already. And therefore, it would be difficult to imagine that he could be a vehicle of change. Whereas I represent someone who has been associated with the demand for change for some time. In fact, if you are willing to go on Google, you will see that I have written about reforms in the Congress party immediately after a defeat in 2014. There was a piece in India today on 10 steps forward and so on. And in terms of my approach to all of this, I have been fairly consistent. I want the Congress and the Congress ideology to prevail. I believe the BJP represents a very grave danger to our country in terms of its ideological orientation. It's potentially representing certain divisive forces. Our approach of an inclusive India, which is my formulation for summarizing an overall policy of both social, economic, and political inclusion. All of this seemed to me to require a Congress that was a little more responsive to changing currents in the world. As you know, in my own writings, I have tried to articulate a certain vision of India, which is broadly consistent with the Congress vision, even though it long predates my joining the Congress party.
Yeah, I've read some of your books.
Even when I was critical of the Congress, it was consistently from what you might call a liberal humanist vision of where the country should go. And I have, for example, deplored the fact that we have allowed the BJP to don the nationalist cloak when we are the original nationalists. I mean, India has a history of achieving freedom under the Congress, and we have defended our freedom in successive major conflicts, 48, 65, 71. 98 Kargil was under a BJP government. But otherwise, this is a country that has proudly defended its nationhood under very skillful Congress leaders. So my own view very simply is that as far as we are concerned, we should never have surrendered the nationalist plank, especially to a party whose heritage comes from leaders who are conspicuously disassociated from the freedom movement and who really don't have any nationalist clothes to wear. And then the second issue for me has always been in the party that we need to appeal to the growing middle class and professionals in our country. I founded the All India Professionals Congress in 2017, but I had first proposed it back in 2009 because it took a while for the Congress party establishment to embrace the idea that we need to do an outreach to professionals and to professional bodies and professional individuals. So my view in the party has always been about how we can strengthen our outreach to these people, and that's the spirit in which I approached it. I am somebody whose writings have all been consistent. Even my Why I'm a Hindu was a way of explaining that there is nothing to duck away from Hinduism. If you understand Hinduism the way it's been taught to most of us growing up as Hindus, and the way it's been taught to us by the likes of Swami Vivekananda, it is a very inclusive and accepting faith. It is a very good vehicle for coexistence of multiple faiths in our country. It is a distortion of Hinduism in Hindutva that is a problem. And that kind of message, for me, is something we ought to embrace. So some of the hesitations that the middle class is facing in looking at us, we can address squarely. And I have been a proud vehicle as a standard bearer for these ideas.
Coming to the acceptance letter that you wrote after the election congratulating Mr. Kharge, you said, and I quote, "It is my hope and belief that the family will remain the foundational pillar of the Congress, our moral conscience, and the ultimate guiding spirit," unquote. Can you contextualize this given the fact that most of the attack on the Congress is that it is beholden to a single family?
It will always have, I know this because I've interacted now with Congress workers for the last 15 years. And I can tell you that for the overwhelming majority of Congress workers, the Gandhi family is beyond criticism. There is a love and regard and loyalty to the Gandhi family, which it would be foolish to ignore if you are in the Congress party. So, my view is it would be short-sighted and one could even argue foolish in the extreme to try and distance yourself from the Gandhi family. And so, even in my campaign, when asked about this, I said I would very much want to involve them. For example, I applauded the Bharat Jodo Yatra. And I said that Rahul Gandhi should be encouraged to continue. Whoever the new president is will be elected on the 20th of October, or 26th now is when he officially gets appointed. But the March goes on till February. I would encourage it to go on. And if I were the president, I would even rejoin it briefly for a while to show support for it and embrace it within the party's fold. There should not be any notion of two power centers, a center around the Gandhis and a center around the president. It is one party and it should function as such. That's why I was careful to include the mention of the Gandhis, to say that nothing I am saying or said during the campaign was meant to separate the party from the Gandhis. But the president will have very specific responsibilities. As I pointed out, and I was very pleased to see Rahul Gandhi echoing this in his statement yesterday, the constitution of the Congress party doesn't require the president to report to anybody. He has certain authority. And that the president must exercise.
Coming to the theory of internal democracies in political parties and how presidents are elected itself, we have a situation where internal democracy
present in any party. This is the closest we have come to it in any party.
Yeah, hero worship is going on in most political parties. So an election of this nature, doesn't it give opportunity for more problems given the nature of internal democracies being practiced in India?
So I tried to do it in a constructive spirit. And in my campaign, you will not find one negative word against the party establishment, or against the establishment candidate, Mr. Kharge. What I spoke about was we can make a good party better. We can basically improve ourselves if we adopt my reforms, and it will actually empower the workers. So it's very much an inward-looking campaign within the party workers. For example, I pointed out to PCC delegates that ironically, if they had some other post, they had some work to do, but if they had no other post but PCC delegate, this is the first job that any PCC delegate has had for 22 years, is voting in the election on the 17th. And I said that shouldn't be the case. PCC delegate should mean something because you're the ones who choose the party president. So we should have, for example, wherever a senior party worker, party president, general secretary, a minister, if we are in power somewhere, comes to your district, you should be sitting on the stage. If there is a screening committee to pick a candidate, you should be consulted about the candidates in your Zilla because you are representing that Zilla, and so on. So this message was heard by the PCC delegates because it was a message for them. And a lot of my messaging was about empowering them, having more consultations at all levels, having a Janta Darbar as Indira Gandhi and Nehru used to have, where the Karyakartas from anywhere could come without an appointment, say twice a week, a couple of hours in the morning. Even when they were prime minister, they would receive people at random. It's only now that security concerns and so on have made that difficult. But we should have more access, and we should have elections at all levels, as the constitution mandates, including to the working committee.
The Congress is the only truly national party apart from the BJP. Now, we see that there are a few regional parties trying to create alternatives to the Congress within the opposition space. How do you think this will play out in 2024?
Yeah, it would be presumptuous of me to tell Mr. Kharge what to do, but I would certainly say that outreach to these parties early on should be a priority for us for the simple mathematical reason. The electorate voted against the BJP and yet voted for 46 different parties. And those 46 different parties included parties that won no seats, that won 1 seat, that won 2 seats. But by taking those votes away, they denied one of them, namely the most credible opposition party in that area, a chance to win the seat. So it makes perfect sense to explore the possibility of a national Gathbandhan with a common minimum program, and if that is not possible, a state-by-state set of arrangements. Now we have some, for example, with the DMK, it's worked very well in Tamil Nadu. On the other hand, Bengal, it has turned out to be disastrous. In Bihar, it worked sometimes, didn't work sometimes. And now the Bihar configuration has changed because Nitish Kumar and Tejasvi Yadav and us are on the same platform. Potentially, that's a majority party in Bihar. So, a lot of things have to be discussed on a state-by-state basis, in addition to looking at the national picture. But these state-by-state arrangements should come somehow onto a common national platform so that because most of these parties are like-minded. We don't have major ideological differences, and those parties that split away from the Congress anyway believe in the core Congress ideology, whether it's Mamata Banerjee or Sharad Pawar or Jagan Mohan Reddy or whatever. These all, even KCR is essentially the same ideology as the Congress party. There's no main difference. So we should see why we can't agree. We should be able to agree on a minimum program and very, very state-specific charters. That's my view. And since I'm not the president, I would hope that the president would consider making an early outreach to these parties and saying, let's do this. I was interested that during my own election campaign, there was a lot of interest from people of other parties reaching out to us saying, what's going on? What are your approaches? How do you feel about this and that? There's a lot of interest. So I think we'd like to see more of this happening. And to be honest, I think we've set an example for all the other parties. If we can do this, why shouldn't they also try and hold elections?
Does it worry you that more than 400 plus votes, all delegates of one of the highest bodies of the Congress, their votes were invalid?
But when you hear the story of why they were invalidated, you can see that it was over enthusiasm rather than stupidity. For example, apparently one chap cancelled Mr. Kharge's name 3 times and ticked my name 3 times. That was declared invalid because somebody else ticked my name but drew a heart around my name, and so that was declared invalid. So, this kind of thing is just over enthusiasm, and I must say that I'm touched by it, but sometimes youthful exuberance can cost you the effectiveness of your vote.
Yeah.
So I heard these anecdotes from those who are at the counting. They tried to protest saying the preference is clear.
Yeah.
Because after all, the constitution only requires the voter's preference to be doubtless.
Okay.
But one chap, for example, wrote no against Mr. Kharge's name and wrote yes against my name and ticked. So the tick was there, but by writing no and yes, his vote was invalid. So these are the kinds of stories I heard from our counting agents. And therefore, I think it's disappointing there was such a large number.
Yeah.
But it's also disappointing perhaps that we didn't early put on a training video to all voters, on the internet or something saying, you can do this, but you cannot do this, you cannot do that.
In the recent past, I see a lot of pushback on the part of the Congress against unfair criticism or fake news in mainstream and social media, such as the threat to file a case against journalist Tavleen Singh. At another level is the Bharat Jodo Yatra. Has the transformation of the Congress already begun? And is it focused on 2024 or is it focused on the organization itself?
I think both. I don't know about the fake news cases because I've been busy campaigning and I'm a bit out of touch with what the party has been doing on these matters. But on the general question you're asking, I would say the revival of the Congress has begun. I've said it in my statement. Because both the Bharat Jodo Yatra and the Congress Jodo election have both contributed to a tremendous awakening of interest in the party. I don't think that you've ever seen as much positive coverage of the Congress in the last 8 years as you've seen in the last 3 weeks.
Right.
And to my mind, that is the beginning of this revival story. So I believe the Congress's journey has begun. It will both, I hope, revamp itself internally, though I think Mr. Kharge may not revamp in the same way that I would have done, but he will certainly do some revamping, I have no doubt. And then the other thing, because he said he will implement the Udaipur Declaration, for example. And then at the same time, there will be this question of moving forward with the election strategies and so on. So I think both have to proceed on the same front.
There is a general view that a large majority of people in India, Hindus, have accepted the soft Hindutva approach of the BJP and...
Is the BJP soft? I find it pretty hard. Bulldozer governance against a minority, that is not soft.
Let me put it as the middle class loves some of the agendas of the BJP. There is a lot of support. Are the other political parties, barring the Muslim political parties, forced to follow?
No, I have been arguing for some time in my writing, going back to India from midnight to the millennium, that we should not be embraced, and we should not be ashamed of embracing religion. It so happens the majority of us are Hindu, but whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian, there is no harm in being proud of your faith. Your faith is a personal matter between you and your idea of your maker. It is not the business of the state. But you don't have to shy away from it. I mean, I wrote a sentence in India from Midnight to Millennium, which is now 25 years ago, 1997, saying that one of the concerns that many in the middle class have is that we have created a political culture where a Muslim can say, I'm proud to be Muslim, a Christian can say, I'm proud to be Christian, and a Hindu has to say, I'm proud to be secular. Now, the difficulty with this is there are Hindus who are proud of being Hindu in a way that is not invasive of other faiths at all. And this is where I have been, when I wrote Why I'm a Hindu, I used to make a lot about Swami Vivekananda's famous message in Chicago, that I speak of a faith that has taught the world not just tolerance, but acceptance. And for me, I read this as a schoolboy or a college kid, I mean, certainly as a teenager, and it stayed in my mind because it strikes me as such a profound insight. We all go to history class in school and learn that a tolerant king is a good king, tolerance is a good idea.
Yeah.
When you think about it, tolerance is a very patronizing idea. The tolerant king is actually saying, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will magnanimously indulge you in your right to be wrong. Whereas what Swami Vivekananda says, that Hinduism is not about tolerance. Hinduism is about acceptance. The tolerant, the accepting Hindu says, I believe I have the truth. You believe you have the truth. I will respect your truth. Please respect my truth. Now, that is the Hinduism in which I grew up. My father was incredibly respectful of other faiths, but he was the most devout Hindus I know. And the truth is that he saw no contradiction when a Christian friend of his, a Catholic friend, came back from the Vatican with an amulet of the Virgin Mary that had been blessed by the then Pope Paul VI, I think it was. My father carried it with him in his pocket all his life. I mean, he's a very devout Hindu. I mean, he went on every pilgrimage you can imagine that he was physically fit to do. But this is something that he saw no contradiction. And I'm proud of my own ecumenism, which comes from my Hinduism. So I'm very secure in my Hinduism because I am not either hostile to other faiths or threatened by other faiths. What the problem with the Hindutva version of Hinduism, which I think the middle class, if you can sensitize them to it, is that their version of Hinduism has a chip on the shoulder. It remembers real and imagined injustices of the past and somehow wants to take revenge on them today, which makes no sense at all. Whatever happened in the past can stay in the past. I'm a student of history. I love history. I always say forgive, but don't forget. So I remember them. I'm aware of them. But, yes, Aurangzeb did terrible things, but undoing them today may create new fissures and wounds in my society today that may hurt India inside and outside. Why would I want to pierce open those wounds? Those are the kinds of questions. So, to my mind, the Hindutva philosophy of the BJP has earned the mistrust of the minorities. Whereas I can speak of a Hinduism that minorities... as a writer, let me tell you two things. When I published Why I'm a Hindu, I was astonished by the number of BJP and even RSS sympathizers who told me how much they liked everything in the book except the sections on Hindutva. But what they liked about my descriptions of Hinduism resonated with them because this was their actual experience of growing up Hindu in India. The second anecdote is, people bring me books to sign. The number of non-Hindus who bring me this book to sign, and its companion volume, The Hindu Way, which doesn't have the Hindutva bits, is quite startling. With large numbers of Christians and Muslims are happy to understand Hinduism from my perspective because they don't see this as either a threatening view of Hinduism or one that diminishes them in any way.
I have this theory that when we gained independence, Nehru was such a towering personality, and hence the discussion between secular elements and the Hindutva elements did not take place. And that conversation is taking place now when the Congress party is pretty weak and does not have a Nehru in place to counter the arguments being advanced in favor of Hindutva. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair criticism, except that I think there are many of us in the party, people like Dr. Karan Singh and myself, who have spoken with some passion and conviction about our Hinduism in ways that others should not find threatening. Not the same way as Nehruji, who really had no interest in or patience for religion of any sort. He was as dismissive of temples as of mandirs as of masjids. He said this to Muslim friends also, that I have no patience for mullahs, I have no patience for sadhus. They're not going to make policy as long as I'm prime minister. That kind of line. You can see correspondence from Nehru. So Nehru had that view, which frankly, if you like, his was a very progressive view. It also included his assumption that caste would disappear from the Indian consciousness. He had a very, very progressive mindset, which, frankly, our subsequent experience has belied. India has become more conscious of caste and more entrenched in religion than in his lifetime. So how can we now, deny this reality? So my argument is, in fact, I made a speech on the Babri Masjid demolition to the Indian consulate in New York, which made some waves at the time because I actually spoke as a believing Hindu. I didn't take the secular position. I've actually argued even politically that trying to debate secular in the old-fashioned literal sense of secular, godless secularism, if you like, versus believing Hindus, you'll always lose the debate in a country where 80% of the population are believing Hindus. But if you take a position between two kinds of believing Hindu, between a Hindu who says my Hinduism does not permit me to destroy somebody else's place of worship, and a Hinduism that says we are taking revenge on what happened 600 years ago, you see the choice. And many people who come, I remember that talk, there was an entire sort of row of strong, VHP and overseas RSS types who had come to heckle me. They sat and listened to me in silence, and one older gentleman came to me afterwards and said, I came here expecting something very different. What you have said, as a Hindu, I am shamed, you're right. So I've really got this feeling that this could have been a valid response. Whereas we have, I'm afraid, either gone from one swing of the pendulum to the other. That is, that we have disavowed Hinduism and other religions altogether in our quest for secularism, and that has not resonated with the electorate. Or we have pandered to the BJP interpretation. I mean, the Youth Congress fellow who was raising money for a Ram Janmabhoomi temple while the rubble of Babri Masjid was still sitting there. That kind of thing suggests that we are being not just inconsistent, but unclear as to what we believe. So in my mind, I have clarity. I would say people like Dr. Karan Singh had absolute clarity. But can we translate that into policy? That remains to be seen. Certainly, if I'm asked to opine, this is an opinion I would share.
Thank you for talking to Frontline.